Samuel Hartwell sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers that had arrived 3 days ago. The silence in his house felt heavier than the Montana snow outside. For 12 years, this ranch had been filled with hopes and dreams. Now it felt like a tomb. He picked up the papers again, reading his ex-wife's signature for the 100th time. Margaret had written a short note on the back. "I can't keep pretending this will work. I need a real family, Samuel. I'm sorry." The words cut deep, but he couldn't blame her. 3 miscarriages in 5 years had taken their toll on both of them. The medical bills were stacked on the counter nearby. Fertility treatments, specialist visits, hormone therapy, they tried everything the doctor suggested. Each failed. Attempt had cost them more than money. It had cost them their joy, their hope, and finally their marriage. Samuel stood up and walked to the window. His ranch stretched out before him, 2,000 acres of prime cattle land that his grandfather had built from nothing. The Hartwell family had worked this land for 3 generations. Now, at 42, Samuel was the last of his line. The thought made his chest tight. Winter was coming early this year. He could see it in the way his cattle huddled together in the far pasture. Soon the real work would begin. Feeding hay twice a day, checking water troughs, making sure the animals stayed healthy through the bitter cold months ahead. It was work meant for 2 people, maybe 3. Margaret had helped when she could, but her heart was never really in ranch life. The phone rang, breaking his thoughts. It was his neighbor, old Bill Thompson from the next ranch over. "Samuel, you doing all right over there?" "Haven't seen Margaret's car in a while." Samuel closed his eyes. Small-town news traveled fast. "She's gone, Bill. Divorce came through this week." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry to hear that, son. You need anything, you just holler." After hanging up, Samuel realized that Bill's call would be the first of many. Everyone in town would know soon enough. The pity in their voices, the awkward silences when he went to the feed store or the diner, he could already imagine it all. That evening, Samuel sat in his father's old leather chair, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The house felt too big, too quiet. He'd grown up here, learned to walk in these hallways, taken his first steps right here in the living room. His parents had raised him with the understanding that someday he'd fill these rooms with his own children. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9 times. Samuel remembered his father winding the clock every Sunday morning, a ritual that had seemed so important back then. Now Samuel wound it himself, but it felt like he was just going through the motions. He thought about selling the ranch. The idea had crossed his mind more than once since Margaret left. He could move to Billings, maybe find work in town. But every time he seriously considered it, something held him back. This land was in his blood. His grandfather had cleared the first pastures by hand. His father had built the barn that still housed his cattle. How could he just walk away from all of that? The next morning brought new problems. His best bull, Thunder, was limping badly. Samuel spent 2 hours examining the massive animal, finally finding a deep cut on his rear hoof. It would heal, but Thunder would need special care for weeks. Just another task that would be easier with help. As he walked back to the house, Samuel noticed his mailbox flag was up. The mail carrier had come and gone while he was in the barn. Most days it was just bills and advertisements. Today was different. Mixed in with the usual junk mail was a catalog he'd never seen before. Prairie Connections, bringing hearts together across the West. The cover showed a smiling couple standing in front of a farmhouse that looked a lot like his own. Samuel almost threw it away. The whole idea seemed desperate, maybe even pathetic. But something made him flip through the pages instead. Inside were dozens of photographs and short descriptions. Women from all over the country, some from other countries too. All looking for new starts, new lives, new chances at happiness. He read their stories with growing interest. There was Katie from Ohio, whose husband had died in a farming accident. She wrote about wanting to honor his memory by continuing the agricultural life they'd planned together. There was Rosa from Texas, who'd grown up on a ranch but moved to the city for work. Now she wanted to return to the country life she'd always loved. Each story was different, but they all had something in common. These women weren't looking for fairy tale romance. They were looking for partnership, for purpose, for a chance to build something meaningful with someone who understood the realities of rural life. Samuel closed the catalog and set it aside. The idea felt too strange, too risky. What would his neighbors think? What would his family have thought? His parents had met at a church social when they were teenagers. Their love story was the kind people wrote songs about, but as the days passed, Samuel found himself thinking about the catalog more and more. He was realistic about his situation. At 42, in a town with more cattle than single people, his chances of meeting someone naturally were pretty slim. And even if he did meet someone, would they want to take on ranch life? Would they want to try for children with a man who might not be able to give them any? The women in the catalog knew what they were signing up for. They were choosing this life deliberately, with open eyes and realistic expectations. Maybe that was actually better than the romantic ideal he'd grown up believing in. 2 weeks after the catalog arrived, Samuel made his decision. He sat down at his kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. Writing the advertisement felt like the hardest thing he'd ever done. Montana rancher, 42, seeks hardworking woman for partnership in ranch life. 2,000 acres, established cattle, operation. Looking for someone who understands the demands and rewards of agricultural life. Must be willing to work as equal partner. Children welcome but not required. Serious inquiries only. He read it over several times, changing words, adding details, taking them out again. Finally, he sealed it in an envelope with the required fee and walked to the mailbox before he could change his mind. The first responses came 3 weeks later. Samuel was surprised by how many letters arrived, each one telling a different story. Of why a woman might choose to start over with a stranger in Montana. Some letters he discarded immediately. A few seemed to misunderstand what ranch life actually involved. Others felt too desperate or too casual. But several caught his attention. Women who wrote about their experiences with farming, who asked practical questions about the work involved, who seemed to understand that this was about building a life together rather than just finding a husband. As winter settled in around his ranch, Samuel found himself looking forward to checking the mail each day. For the first time since Margaret left, he had something to hope for. Maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. 3 months had passed since Samuel placed his advertisement. The letters had slowed to a trickle, and he'd begun to think his search might be over. Most of the women who'd written seemed nice enough, but none felt quite right. Some wanted guarantees he couldn't give. Others seemed to be running from something rather than running toward a new life. Then, on a gray November morning, Samuel found a different kind of letter in his mailbox. The envelope was plain white with no return address. His name was written in careful, flowing handwriting that looked almost old-fashioned. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines. Dear Mr. Hartwell, I read your advertisement in Prairie Connections. I am strong. I am willing to work hard. I have experience with animals and farm life. I ask only for shelter and honest work. If you think I might be suitable, I can arrive on the 3:15 train from Denver next Tuesday. I will wait 1 hour. My name is Elena Kozlov. Samuel read the letter 3 times. It was unlike all the others. No photograph, no long story about her past, no list of what she expected from marriage. Just simple, direct words that somehow said more than pages of other letters had managed. There was something else, too. The way she wrote, I ask only for shelter and honest work, made him think she might be in some kind of trouble. Not criminal. Trouble, but the kind of desperate situation that made a woman willing to marry a stranger just to have a safe place to live. Samuel spent the weekend thinking about it. Tuesday was only 5 days away. If he didn't show up at the train station, she'd wait an hour and then what? Go back to whatever situation had made her desperate enough to answer his advertisement? On Monday night, he made his decision. He cleaned his truck, put on his best shirt, and drove the 40 miles to town. The train station was small, just a platform and a little waiting room that served 3 trains a day. Samuel had been there. Many times over the years, picking up farm equipment or saying goodbye to friends who were moving away, Tuesday afternoon came cold and gray. Samuel arrived at the station 30 minutes early, his stomach tight with nerves. What if she changed? Her mind? What if she took one look at him and decided to get back on the train? What if this whole thing was a terrible mistake? The 3:15 train was on time. Samuel heard its whistle long before he could see it, echoing across the empty fields that surrounded the town. As it pulled into the station, he found himself holding his breath. Only a handful of people got off. Samuel recognized most of them: Mrs. Peterson returning from visiting her sister, young Jake Wilson coming back from college, the traveling salesman who came through once a month. Then he saw her, Elena Kozlov, step down from the train carrying a small canvas bag that looked like it held everything she owned. Samuel almost didn't recognize her as a woman at first. Her head was completely shaved, smooth as an egg. But that wasn't the strangest part. Her scalp was covered in markings. Dark lines and symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal or burned wood. The markings weren't random. They formed patterns that seemed to mean something, though Samuel couldn't. Guess what? The designs flowed down from her head onto her neck, disappearing under the collar of her threadbare coat. The other passengers gave her a wide berth as they walked past. Samuel heard Mrs. Peterson whisper something to her companion, and Jake Wilson actually crossed to the other side of the platform to avoid walking near her. Elena seemed to notice none of this. She stood perfectly still, scanning the platform with dark eyes that missed nothing. When those eyes found Samuel, she walked directly toward him. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he'd expected. Maybe late 20s, with sharp cheekbones and pale skin that made the dark markings on her head stand out even more. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, but something about the way she carried herself suggested hidden strength. Mr. Hartwell? Her voice carried a slight accent that he couldn't place, something from Eastern Europe maybe. Yes, that's me. You must be Elena. She nodded once, a quick, efficient movement. Thank you for coming. They stood there for a moment, sizing each other up. Samuel had expected this moment to be awkward, but Elena's direct gaze somehow made it feel more like a business meeting than a romantic encounter. Is this all your luggage? He asked, gesturing to her small bag. Yes, I do not need much. The drive back to the ranch was mostly quiet. Samuel tried to make conversation a few times, asking about her trip and whether she was hungry. But Elena's answers were short and polite. She spent most of the drive looking out the window at the passing landscape, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Samuel found himself stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. The markings on her hands were different from the ones on her head, more like writing than symbols. He wanted to ask about them, but didn't know how to bring it up without sounding rude. When they reached the ranch, Elena climbed out of the truck and stood for a moment, taking in the house, the barn, the cattle in the distance. Samuel wondered what she was thinking. Did it look like what she'd expected? Was she having second thoughts? It is bigger than I thought, she said finally. The ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built most of it himself. Elena nodded, still looking around. It must be much work, yes, especially alone. She turned to look at him then, and Samuel saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there at the train station. Not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of hope. I'm not afraid of work, she said. Samuel showed her to the spare bedroom, the one that had been meant for children who never came. Elena set her bag on the bed and looked around the simple room. Just a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. This is good, she said. Thank you. That evening, Samuel cooked dinner for 2 for the first time in months. Elena helped without being asked, moving around the kitchen like she'd been there for years. She didn't say much, but she seemed to know what needed to be done. After dinner, Elena excused herself and went to her room. Samuel sat in the living room, listening to the sounds of someone else moving around in his house. It felt strange, but not unwelcome. Around 9 o'clock, he saw light flickering under Elena's door. Curious, he walked quietly down the hall. Through the keyhole, he could see Elena sitting on the floor beside her bed, a single candle burning. Beside her, she was carefully drawing new markings on her hands with what looked like a piece of charcoal, whispering words in a language he didn't recognize. Samuel backed away from the door, feeling like he'd seen something private and sacred. Whatever those markings meant to Elena, they were important enough that she renewed them every night. As he got ready for bed, Samuel realized that bringing Elena to his ranch might be more complicated than he'd expected. But for the first time in months, his house didn't feel empty. Elena woke up before dawn on her first morning at the ranch. Samuel found her in the kitchen at 5:30, already dressed and waiting. She'd made coffee using his old percolator, something he hadn't bothered with since Margaret left. "You did?" "Not need to wake so early," Samuel said, pouring himself a cup. "On a farm, the animals do not wait." Elena replied simply. Samuel had planned to ease her into ranch work. Maybe show her around first and let her get settled. But Elena had other ideas. She followed him to the barn and watched carefully as he explained the morning routine. Within minutes, she was helping him carry feed buckets, her movements quick and sure. What surprised Samuel most was how naturally she worked with the cattle. The animals, usually skittish around strangers, seemed calm around Elena. She spoke to them in her native language, her voice soft and musical. Even Thunder, the injured bull who'd been grumpy and difficult, stood quietly while she examined his healing hoof. "You have done this before," Samuel observed. Elena nodded, scratching behind Thunder's ears. "My family had cattle before we came to America." It was the first real piece of information she'd shared about her past. Samuel wanted to ask more, but something in Elena's expression warned him not to push over the next few days. Elena proved herself invaluable. She worked from sunrise to sunset without complaint, learning the ranch routine faster than Samuel had expected. She fixed the gate latch that had been broken for months, organized the tool shed, and somehow convinced the chickens to start laying eggs again. But she remained a mystery. Every evening, she disappeared into her room with her piece of charcoal and her candle. Samuel could hear her whispering in what he now recognized as Ukrainian. Based on the few words he'd picked up from other immigrants in town, the townspeople were talking, of course. When Samuel went to the feed store, conversation stopped when he walked in. He could feel their curious stares, hear the whispered questions about his strange new helper. Some people crossed the street rather than walk past Elena when she came. To town with him. Dr. Morrison, the local physician, was more direct than most. He cornered Samuel at the diner one afternoon. "That woman of yours," Dr. Morrison said, stirring his coffee slowly. "Those markings on her head, you know what they are?" Samuel shook his head. He'd been wondering the same thing for weeks. "I studied folk medicine in medical school," Dr. Morrison continued. "Saw similar practices in Eastern Europe during the war. Traditional healing symbols, protective prayers, that sort of thing. Usually done by women who've been through something traumatic." The doctor's words stayed with Samuel all afternoon. That evening, he found Elena in the barn, checking on a cow that had seemed unwell earlier. The animal was lying down peacefully, and Elena was sitting beside her, one hand resting on the cow's flank. "She will be fine," Elena said without looking up. "Just tired from carrying her calf." Samuel sat down on a hay bale nearby. In the soft lamplight, Elena's strange markings looked less threatening and more like what Dr. Morrison had suggested. Symbols with meaning, prayers written on skin. "Elena," Samuel said carefully, "you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but I'd like to understand. Those markings you draw every night, what do they mean?" Elena was quiet for so long that Samuel thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Protection," she said. "My grandmother taught me. In Ukraine before the soldiers came." Samuel waited, sensing there was more. "My grandmother said the old prayers, the old ways, they keep the bad things away. When I was small, she would draw symbols on my hands before I went to sleep. She said they would keep me safe from nightmares." Elena stood up and brushed hay from her clothes. "When I was older, I learned to draw them myself." "In your head?" Samuel asked gently. Elena's hand went unconsciously to her scalp. That is different. That is ... morning. She walked to the barn door and stared out at the star-filled sky. Samuel joined her, waiting. I was married before, Elena said finally. In Denver, American man. Good job, nice house. I thought I was lucky. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. He'd suspected Elena was running from something, but hearing it confirmed made it real. He wanted children very much. When they did not come, he became ... angry. He said it was my fault that I was broken. Elena's voice remained steady, but Samuel could hear the pain underneath. The doctors, they said the same thing they probably told you. Sometimes it just does not happen. Samuel thought about his own struggles with infertility, the medical appointments, the disappointment, the blame that had slowly poisoned his marriage. Last time, Elena continued, I lost the baby at 5 months. We had picked names, bought clothes. I was so sad I could not eat, could not sleep. My husband said I was being dramatic, that I should get over it and try again. She touched her scalp. Again, in my country, when someone dies, the women cut their hair. It is a sign of grief, of respect for the lost one. I cut mine after we lost the baby. My husband was furious. He said I looked like a crazy person, that I was embarrassing him. Samuel felt anger rising in his chest, but he stayed quiet. One night, he grabbed my hair, what little had grown back. He shook me, called me useless, said I was not a real woman. I fought back. He hit me. I hit him back harder. Elena turned to look at Samuel directly. I left that night. Took nothing but my grandmother's prayer book and the clothes I was wearing. I went to a place for women like me, women who need help getting away. The shelter helped you come here? They helped me learn about the mail order programs. Said it. Might be a chance for a new start, away from Denver, away from him. Elena paused. I shaved my head again before I came here. Fresh morning, but not just for the baby. For the woman I used to be, the one who believed in fairy tales. Samuel understood now why Elena had seemed so businesslike at the train station. Why she'd asked only for shelter and honest work. She wasn't looking for romance or rescue. She was looking for safety and a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. The charcoal markings, Samuel said. They're prayers for protection? Elena nodded. Every night I draw them new. Prayers for safety, for peace, for the strength to keep going. My grandmother's words, her grandmother's words, going back generations. The women in my family, we have always found ways to protect ourselves. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the soft sounds of cattle settling for the night. Samuel thought about everything Elena had told him, about the courage it must have taken to leave her old life and start over with a stranger. I'm glad you came here, he said finally. Elena looked surprised. Even knowing all this? Especially knowing all this. You're not the only one who's been through hard times, Elena. Maybe that's why this works. We both know what it's like to lose what we thought we wanted most. Elena smiled then, the first real smile Samuel had seen from her. It transformed her face completely, making her look younger and more hopeful. Tomorrow, she said, I will teach you to make proper Ukrainian bread. My grandmother's recipe. It will be good with the eggs from your stubborn chickens. As they walked back to the house together, Samuel realized that Elena's story hadn't scared him away. If anything, it made him respect her more. She was a survivor, like him. Maybe together they could build something better than either of them had lost. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the ranch in 3 feet of snow by December. Samuel had worried about how Elena would handle her first Montana winter, but she seemed to thrive in the cold. She'd grown up in Ukraine, she reminded him, where winters made Montana look mild. The snow changed their daily routine. Instead of working separate parts of the ranch, they spent most of their time together, moving from barn to barn, checking on animals and breaking ice on water troughs. Elena had sewn herself a warm hat from old blankets, covering her still short hair and the fading charcoal markings on her scalp. Samuel noticed that Elena drew fewer symbols each night now. Instead of covering her hands and arms, she made only small marks on her wrists, simple crosses and circles that she could easily hide under her sleeves. When he asked about it, Elena said she felt safer now, like she needed less protection than before. Their conversations grew longer during those cold months. While they worked, Elena would tell Samuel stories about her childhood in Ukraine, about helping her grandmother tend goats, about learning to preserve vegetables for winter, about the songs women sang while they worked. In return, Samuel shared memories of growing up on the ranch, about his father teaching him to read cattle behavior, about the year a blizzard trapped his family for 2 weeks. Elena proved to be full of practical knowledge that Samuel had never encountered. When 2 of his cows got sick with what looked like pneumonia, Elena mixed herbs she'd found growing wild on the ranch into a paste that helped them recover faster than the expensive medicine from the veterinarian. "How did you know that would work?" Samuel asked, watching the cows graze peacefully in the snow. "My grandmother taught me. She said people have been healing animals this way for hundreds of years, long before there were doctors for cows." Dr. Morrison was fascinated when Samuel told him about Elena's folk remedies. The old doctor had been practicing for 40 years, but he'd never seen anything like the herbal treatments Elena used. "Those old European methods," Dr. Morrison said, "there's real science behind a lot of them. Your Elena might know more about animal medicine than half the veterinarians I've met." The townspeople's attitude toward Elena began to change slowly. At first, it was just practical acceptance. When Mrs. Henderson's prized rooster got injured, Elena helped heal the bird with a poultice made from plants she'd gathered. When the Johnson family's milk cow stopped producing, Elena suggested changes to the animal's diet that solved the problem. Within a week, word spread quickly in their small community. Elena never advertised her knowledge or asked for payment, but people began stopping by the ranch to ask her advice about sick animals or failing crops. She always helped when she could. Speaking in her careful English and demonstrating her grandmother's techniques, Samuel watched these interactions with growing admiration. Elena had a gift for making people feel comfortable, despite her unusual appearance. She listened carefully to their problems and offered solutions, without making them feel foolish for not knowing the old methods themselves. One afternoon in late January, a massive blizzard struck without warning. Samuel and Elena were in the far barn when the wind picked up and the snow began falling so hard they couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. By the time they made it back to the house, the storm had them completely trapped. For 5 days, they couldn't leave the house. The snow piled up past the windows, and the wind howled so loud they had to shout to hear each other across the room. The power went out on the second day, leaving them with only the fireplace for heat and oil lamps for light. Samuel had lived through plenty of Montana blizzards, but being trapped with another person was a new experience. He'd expected it to be awkward, maybe even uncomfortable. Instead, it felt surprisingly natural. Elena kept them fed with simple meals cooked over the fire. She showed Samuel how to make soup from dried vegetables and preserved meat, stretching their supplies to last longer than he'd thought possible. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking or reading books by Lampl. It was during those long, quiet hours that they finally addressed what their arrangement really meant. They'd been living together for 3 months, working side by side every day, but they'd never discussed the future or what they expected from each other. "Samuel," Elena said one evening, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, "I want you to know something. I am grateful for what you have given me, a home, work, safety, but I cannot be the wife your first wife was." Samuel looked up from the harness he was mending. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I cannot pretend to feel things I do not feel. I cannot promise you romance or passion. I have been hurt too much to trust those feelings again." Samuel set down his work. "Is that what you think I want from you?" Elena studied his face in the firelight. "Is it not? When men seek wives, is that not what they hope for?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his marriage to Margaret, about the expectations they'd both carried into their relationship. "I thought it was," he said finally. With Margaret, we started with all those feelings, love, passion, dreams about our future. But when things got hard, when we couldn't have children, all those feelings weren't enough to hold us together. Elena nodded slowly. Love is not always enough. What you've given me these past months, Samuel continued, the partnership, the shared work, the companionship, it feels more solid than what I had before. More real. Elena moved closer to him on the couch. You are not disappointed? That I cannot offer you a traditional marriage? Samuel thought about it honestly. Elena, I'm 42 years old. I've been married, I've been divorced, I've struggled with infertility and loneliness and failure. I don't need fairy tale romance anymore. I need what we have, respect, friendship. Shared goals? And children? Elena asked quietly. The doctors said it was unlikely for both of us. If it happens, we'll face it together. If it doesn't, we'll build a different kind of life. Either way, I'd rather do it with you than alone. Elena smiled, and Samuel realized how much her expressions had changed since she'd arrived. The guarded, frightened look had been replaced by something warmer, more confident. Then we understand each other, she said. We do. That night, for the first time since Elena's arrival, they sat together on the couch, Elena's head resting against Samuel's shoulder as they watched the fire burn low. It wasn't romance in the traditional sense, but it was intimacy, the comfortable closeness of two people who had chosen to trust each other when the storm finally broke. They dug their way out to find a world transformed by snow. The ranch looked different, more peaceful somehow. As they worked together to clear paths and check on the animals, Samuel realized that he and Elena had been transformed too. They'd started as strangers bound by a practical arrangement. Now they were partners in the truest sense. Two people who had found in each other not the love they'd once dreamed of, but something perhaps more valuable, understanding, respect, and the promise of a shared future built on honest ground. Spring was still months away, but Samuel could already imagine it. Elena's garden growing beside the house, new calves in the pasture, and the quiet satisfaction of work done together by two people who had learned that sometimes the best relationships are built not on passion, but on something much stronger, the simple decision to face life's challenges side by side. Spring came slowly to the Montana ranch, melting the snow inch by inch and revealing the brown earth underneath. Elena spent hours walking the property, identifying plants and planning where she wanted to put her garden. Her hair had grown out during the winter months, now covering her scalp in short, dark curls that hid the last traces of her charcoal markings. Samuel watched her from the kitchen window one morning as she knelt beside the old chicken coop, sketching garden layouts in a notebook she'd bought in town. She looked different now, more settled, more at home. The fearful woman who'd stepped off the train 6 months ago had been replaced by someone confident and purposeful. The soil is good here, Elena announced when she came inside, dirt still clinging to her hands. My grandmother always said you can tell good earth by how it smells after rain. This place smells like growth, Samuel smiled. Elena's English had improved dramatically over the winter, but she still had a poetic way of expressing herself that reminded him of her grandmother's old world wisdom. They spent April preparing for the busy season ahead. Elena threw herself into ranch work with renewed energy, helping Samuel repair fences, vaccinate cattle, and prepare for the spring calving season. The townspeople had fully accepted her by now. When Elena walked through town, people waved and stopped to chat about their animals or ask for advice about their gardens. It was during the 3rd week of April that Elena first felt sick. She'd been working in her newly planted garden when a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly she had to sit down in the dirt. Samuel found her there 20 minutes later, pale and shaky. Just tired, she insisted when Samuel helped her to the house. I worked too long in the sun, but the sickness continued. Every morning for a week, Elena would wake up feeling nauseated. She'd lost her appetite for coffee, something Samuel had never seen before. Elena loved her morning coffee almost as much as she loved her evening rituals. Samuel began to suspect what Elena seemed determined to ignore. On a Tuesday morning, after watching Elena rush from the breakfast table to be sick in the bathroom, he gently suggested she see Dr. Morrison. I'm fine, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Elena, when was your last monthly cycle? Elena froze, her hand halfway to her mouth with a piece of toast. Samuel could see her mentally counting backwards, and he watched the color drain from her face. No, she whispered. It cannot be. The doctor said. Doctors can be wrong, Samuel said gently. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Samuel, I cannot go through this again. I cannot lose another baby. It will break me completely. Samuel knelt beside her chair and took her hands. You don't know that's what will happen. And you won't go through it alone this time. Dr. Morrison confirmed what they both suspected. Elena was pregnant, about 8 weeks along based on his examination. It was further than she'd ever made it before without complications. Your hormone levels look good, Dr. Morrison told them, reviewing Elena's test results. Heart rate is strong. I know your history, Elena, but every pregnancy is different. We'll monitor you carefully. Elena was quiet during the drive home. Samuel could see her hands shaking in her lap, and he knew she was remembering her previous losses, the disappointment and grief that had nearly destroyed her first marriage. What if something goes wrong? She asked as they turned into their driveway. Then we'll face it together, Samuel replied. But Elena, what if something goes right? Over the following weeks, Samuel watched Elena struggle with cautious hope and persistent fear. She continued working on the ranch but moved more carefully, as if any sudden movement might disturb the life growing inside her. She stopped applying charcoal markings altogether, saying she didn't want to risk any chemicals near the baby. The changes in Elena's body became more obvious as spring turned toward summer. Her face filled out, losing the sharp angles that had made her look so stern when she first arrived. She developed a small but noticeable bump that she tried to hide under loose shirts. Samuel found himself becoming protective in ways that surprised him. He took over the heavy lifting, insisted Elena rest more, and worried constantly about her health. Elena tolerated his concern with patient amusement. You act like I am made of glass, she teased one afternoon when Samuel wouldn't let her carry a bag of feed. Maybe I just don't want to take any chances, Samuel replied. As Elena entered her second trimester, further along than she'd ever been before. The town began to buzz with excitement. Mrs. Henderson started knitting baby blankets. The pastor's wife organized a collection of baby clothes from families whose children had outgrown them. Elena was overwhelmed by the community's support. In my first marriage, Elena told Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt so alone when I was pregnant. My husband was embarrassed by my morning sickness, annoyed when I was tired. Here, people celebrate with us even though we are not officially married. Samuel had been thinking about that. They'd been living as partners for almost a year now, building a life together that felt more solid than many traditional marriages he'd observed. Maybe it was time to make it official. Elena, he said carefully, how would you feel about getting married? Legally, I mean, Elena looked surprised. You want this? Even though our relationship is not like other marriages, I want you to have security. I want our child to have my name if that's something you'd like. I want people to know that what we have is real, even if it's different from what they expect. Elena was quiet for a long time, her hand resting on her growing belly. In Ukraine, marriage is about family, about building something together. Love grows from partnership, not the other way around. And here, Elena smiled, here, I think we have already built our family. The ceremony would just be telling the world what we already know. They were married on a warm Saturday in June, in a simple ceremony at the community church. Elena wore a dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue cotton that complemented her dark hair, which had grown long enough to braid with small wildflowers. Samuel wore his father's best suit, altered to fit him properly. The whole town came to the wedding. Even people Elena had never met showed up with gifts and well wishes. Dr. Morrison gave Elena away, having become something of a father figure to her over the months. The reception was held in the church hall with potluck dishes and dancing. To music played on an old piano, Elena glowed throughout the celebration, her pregnancy obvious now at 6 months. Samuel had never seen her so happy, so at peace with herself and her place in the world. That night, as they settled into bed as husband and wife, Elena placed Samuel's hand on her belly. "Feel?" she whispered. Samuel felt a strong kick against his palm, and his eyes filled with tears. This baby, their baby, was active and healthy and real. "Our child is strong," Elena said. "Like us." Samuel looked at his wife, because that's what she was now, in every way that mattered, and marveled at the journey that had brought them together. Two broken people who had found healing in partnership, who had built love from respect and trust rather than passion and promises. Elena no longer drew symbols on her skin. The protection she'd once sought from ancient prayers, she'd found instead in the life they'd created together. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings, Samuel realized, led to the most extraordinary stories.